I'm gonna go in there, and I'm gonna bust Molly out.
And just how the bloomin' heck are you going to do that?
Well, by,
The movie Chicken Run, The Dawn of the Nugget is pretty good, although I wouldn't say it's better than the first movie. I have to admit, when I first watched it, the plot was super predictable. I could tell exactly what was going to happen. The chickens are living on this isolated island paradise, never leaving or anything, and Ginger and Rocky have a daughter who decides to run away because she doesn't feel free there. That's pretty much the gist of the story. I mean, it's a decent movie, but it just doesn't have the same impact as the original. It was enjoyable, but the plot was just too easy to figure out from the start. Unlike the first movie where the chickens were running from danger, this time they're actually running towards danger, which is a factory. There's a plot twist too. The wife of the guy who owns the factory is Mrs. Tweety, the same lady who tried to kill all the chickens in the first movie. So Ginger and Rocky's daughter escapes from the island to have some adventures and meets another chicken called Frizzle. Together they end up at the factory, thinking it's a paradise, but it's really not. All the chickens back on the island come up with some crazy plans to rescue Ginger's daughter, and the plans are just so wacky and clever. It's like they're geniuses when it comes to coming up with wild schemes. In my opinion, the best part of the movie is how smart the chickens are. They're super intelligent and always coming up with clever plans. So, the whole purpose of the factory is to make the best chicken nuggets in the world. And that crazy scientist guy wants to control all the chickens by putting collars on them, so they won't be scared or nervous when they're about to die. According to him, if a chicken is scared or stressed before it dies, the meat will be dry and tough. But if the chicken is happy and relaxed, the meat will be soft and juicy. It's kind of a wild plan when you think about it, but that's what he wants to do. He wants to make the chickens happy right before they die so that the meat will be high quality. So, the chickens break into the factory to rescue Molly, and the coolest part of the whole mission was when they finally rescued Molly and were ready to leave, but instead of leaving, they decided to go back in and rescue the other chicken, Frizzle, who had become Molly's friend. Even though it was a risky move, all the chickens went back to rescue the rest of the chickens in the factory. It was a really brave and noble move, even though the movie wasn't as impactful as the first one. It just shows how much these chickens care for each other, and how they're willing to put their own lives at risk to help out their friends. It's a pretty heartwarming moment. Mrs. Tweety is still holding a grudge against the chickens from the first movie, and she's only engaged to that scientist guy because she knows his plan to make better chicken nuggets will give her control over the factory. But of course, Ginger and the other chickens manage to mess up Mrs. Tweety's plans by rescuing all the chickens and stopping the scientist from putting collars on them. In the end, the chickens aren't afraid to leave the island anymore and they're living happily in their new home. Mrs. Tweety's plans for revenge were thwarted, and she'll have to find another way to get back at the chickens. It just goes to show that you shouldn't mess with chickens, especially when they're smart and determined like Ginger and her crew. They'll always find a way to outsmart their enemies and protect their friends. The movie leaves you wondering if there will be a third installment, but there are definitely signs pointing in that direction. If there is a third movie, we don't know what the chickens will be up to, but it's likely to be just as entertaining as the first two. Overall, the movie is good, with lots of interesting details and a compelling story. Even though it's not quite as impactful as the first one, it still has a lot to offer, and I think the chickens are amazing characters. That's just my opinion on the movie though. It's definitely worth watching for anyone who likes funny and clever stories with a lot of heart. The chickens will win you over, for sure,